Welcome back. Please take a seat so we can start with our final panel discussion. Roughly half of all post-conflict countries relapse into conflict within a decade. Our final panel discussion will delve into our final phase of the conflict cycle, post-conflict reconstruction. The session will ask why and how to integrate resilience and adaptation into post-conflict and recovery contexts. The session will be moderated by Emma Whittaker, Senior Advisor at Adelphi. Big applause, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the fellow panelists to come and join me up on the stage, please. Thank you. This way or that way? Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful. Anywhere, yeah. Sure, yeah, move down. Thank you. Yep, please. Anywhere. Thank you. All right. So we've made it to the fourth and the final plenary session. So this was see us drawing a through line through the conflict cycle and talk about how we're integrating climate into post-conflict reconstruction, as Anna presented for us. So as we've seen today across all the plenary discussions and the breakout sessions, and surely in the course of our work, we're really at a critical juncture where we are seeing the imperatives of peace and peace building really intersecting with the need to build long-term climate resilience. Notably so, this is true when we are navigating the complex challenge of rebuilding societies that are emerging from conflict. And this is, facing the added complexity of a changing climate. So in recent years, of course, climate change has been understood to exacerbate vulnerabilities and create new challenges, especially so in post-conflict environments. From water scarcity, challenging the renewal of agricultural recovery, to extreme weather, straining infrastructure. The climate crisis is clearly posing significant risks to the process of rebuilding societies in the aftermath of war. So the task now is really to envision and implement reconstruction efforts that both address the immediate needs of communities in a post-conflict environment, but also to establish and support the building of long-term resilience. So this means integrating climate into everything as a part of post-conflict planning, from governance to economic recovery to social cohesion and security sector reform. So as we delve into the panel today, I want us all to think about how we're supporting communities emerging from conflict to build the climate for peace. And I want to encourage everybody to think creatively about how we can leverage climate action as a tool for sustaining stability. So I'll introduce the panel. Today I'm honored to be sharing the stage with so many wonderful women. So first I'll introduce Dr. Elizabeth Carabine. She is a climate security advisor at the Office of the Special Representative to the Secretary General for the Horn of Africa. Thank you for being here. Next we have Almet Veylan-Karimi. She is the strategic advisor. She's a strategic advisor and member of the board of the United Nations Peacebuilding Fund and a former chairperson of the Center for International Peace Operations, ZIF. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Her Excellency Bogolo Joy Kenyawendo, who is the managing director of Kenyawendo Advisory and former MP and cabinet minister of Investment, Trade and Industry for the governments of Botswana. Thank you for being here. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Swathi Veeravalli, who's the Director of Climate Security and Adaptation at the National Security Council for the White House. So thank you all for being here. So to start things off, I asked all of the panelists to imagine themselves standing within a community and think within 1 minute what they could tell me of a tool that they would have that they would bring to a community to support rebuilding after war, to build peace and to think about climate integration in that context. So I've asked them to keep it very short just to get things going, and we'll see how that goes. So maybe we'll start with you, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi to my fellow panelists. So first of all, I should say that the mandate of my office and the special envoy of the office is a prevention mandate. So first of all, it's depressing to find yourself in a post-conflict situation, but unfortunately in the Horn of Africa, that's where we are, as you've seen this morning, more often than not. So I won't win the prize for the most creative answer here, I think, but it's an important one to say that my tool is that I'm privileged to draw on the good offices of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General. And if you have met her, Special Envoy Hannah Tete, you know she's a formidable and played a trusted role in many of the regional conflicts in the Horn of Africa and on the climate, peace and security agenda. So even at the community level, in some of the contexts that we see in the Horn, this kind of function after the hard work of reaching a ceasefire agreement or cessation of hostilities is where the cool heads need to prevail, the trusted actors need to be there to chart out the solutions and way forward for those communities. So I will just take the liberty, since she left her post last week, to pay tribute to the efforts of the Special Envoy, and we'll speak more about those. Thanks.
Thank you. Well done. Next, Helmut. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And first of all, congratulations to Adelphi and the Federal Foreign Office on a wonderful conference. And I do love elevator pitches. I guess we have to go to the 36th floor and maybe go back. Let me try to be short and brief. Well, we all know it's a time of growing needs and shrinking funds. We have heard that all over. And at the same time, countries in conflicts are disproportionately affected by climate change. And at the same time, because of this conflict situation, they receive less climate financing. That is a real dilemma, so to say. So my idea about this wonderful thing we have to do, or your question is, we have to create more synergies. And what I would do, and what I've seen in the field oftentimes, is that there is no good coordination, there's no synergy. We all know everybody wants to coordinate, nobody wants to be coordinated. However, I would call in a town hall meeting, in whatever context we are, and invite actors, the local level, local authorities, civil society, regional level, country level, transboundary, neighboring countries, bring in women, bring in youth, and ask all of them the same question. What are your needs? What are your interests? And what are your objectives? And nowadays, with the digital tools, it would be easy. You don't even have to organize a conference, just bring in everybody online. And after this pitch, I would then have a team to analyze this and then prioritize. So that's my idea.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. So I'm a big proponent for indigenous knowledge and indigenous practices. And so I want to take from indigenous neighborly practices from Botswana. There's so many that I could take from, but there's one in particular called Masotla, which essentially is during the time of drought, the chief / the king would allocate certain plots, fields, and have the community grow in these particular spots, and then the harvest would be put in community silos, and in the time of a good harvest, still put in community silos so that in time of dire times, everybody can eat. So essentially, it is that spirit of good neighborliness and good community-based spirit to ensure that, we grow together, we develop together, and essentially we realize that we are stronger together than we are apart, because that's what you need post-conflict, but most importantly, post-climate shock. And I think it is going back to those basics, not only in how we grow our food, but in how we socialize, that we truly can move forward better and stronger together. And once again, thank you to everybody who's been involved in organizing this. It's been such a great day.
Thank you. That's great. Swati?
Thank you so much. My thanks also to the organizers and my wonderful panelists. It's an honor to be here. It's hard to follow up those very excellent comments. Thanks for making me go last. But in order to add to that and to add to what Bongolo outlined, I think for me, if I had a tool, a wish list, it would be to create a governance structure that permits jobs and livelihoods as an outcome of the climate process. I was recently at the Africa Climate Summit, and I was having a conversation with an individual, and I was talking about adaptation. And he pushed back at me and he said, "Don't come to me and talk to me about adaptation. I know how to adapt. We need livelihoods and we need some support creating economic resilience in our communities." And that really struck me, I think, in terms of what's our end state. And I think that was a comment that Janani made earlier in terms of what is the opportunity associated with the work that we're doing today in this conference, and hopefully throughout the processes after this, is really to help sort of create those interdependencies between micro scale, which are the community and local led, but also, and having that feedback loop with what the nation state and the macro scale in terms of the larger global economic model, in a way that maximizes economic opportunities for folks at the very local level. Because for me, that is success. And that's the opportunity that we could all work towards if we can sort of solve the climate crisis, if we can tackle the climate security crisis. My family is originally from India, but I actually grew up in Gaborone in Botswana, so Dumelang. And having that experience, I can say that, and now working as a policymaker, that we have to do more economic-based policy. So that lens has to be there through everything that we do. So when we're talking about climate policy, we're really trying to infuse the aspects of climate into that. And I think that was a comment that Mr. Miliband made earlier today, is that adaptation is inversely correlated with a country's finances. And I think if we can solve that in this room, we can flip that, or at least try to create some equanimity.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's no small challenge to sum all of that up in less than a minute. So thank you to all the panelists for indulging me with that question. And it's great to hear about the diverse perspectives in sort of answering that question. And yet there was a really nice through line about collaboration and good relationship building and togetherness. So I appreciate all that. And so with that, I will dive a little bit more deeply. And Almet, I'll ask you first. So based on your extensive experience, both at the Peacebuilding Fund and much more beyond that, can you sort of just talk a little bit about, for us, how post-conflict reconstruction efforts, can effectively integrate climate resilience and really work to prevent a relapse into conflict? As Anna had mentioned, quite a high statistic about countries relapsing into conflict. And so what can it look like to integrate climate resilience to avoid that? Thanks.
Great. Well, let me start with giving you kind of 5 insights from a thematic review done by the Peacebuilding Fund last year on climate and security and peace, which Emma actually has been involved. So she does know the result, but I'm happy to share the 5 highlights and give you 2 quick examples of what I've seen on the ground with my own eyes, which I believe are examples of environmental peacebuilding working. So about the thematic review, there are 5 key learnings. One is we need cross-border regional approaches for obvious reasons. And with these approaches, we have to focus on political engagement, which is very important. We have to do more risk-tolerant approaches, because as I said in the beginning, we have more and more countries in conflict and fragile and as well affected by climate change. And we have to invest exactly in these countries where there is climate change effects plus conflict, I guess, and then use that as a starting conversation for others to join in. Then we have to see there is a co-benefits of climate, peace and security on the human security issues. The minister has highlighted this morning as well, which I believe is very important because communities see a difference after these interventions. And then talking about nexus all day, I mean, we can have a long list what should be all connected, but there is an important gender climate security nexus with peace, because especially when we talk about natural resource management, like water, traditionally is women who know the most about it. So have them participate in decision-making, have them participate in whatever form the communities have and empower them through this as well. And last but not least, I would say it's very important to enforce the project design, learning and innovation. And one thing that is important and what traditionally does not happen is that during a project cycle we have, make check-ins with the theory of change. The traditional form we do, project implementation, we all know that you get money for something, then you implement it, whether it really makes sense or not. And we all understand how quickly these situations do change on the ground. So we have to do these adaptations and we need the freedom when we do these projects. So 2 quick examples. One is from the bordering region between Mauritania and Mali in the Sahel. And I visited this end of last year with the Peacebuilding Fund. And there are 2 villages called Melge. One is on the Mali side of the border, and the other one is on the Mauritanian side. So they're basically partner communities. It's agro-pastoral communities. They're the traditional transhumans. How do you say that in English? Transhumans?
Transhumans, yeah.
Well, I'm probably the French sounds better. The transhumans, conflicts between the herders and the farmers. And traditionally, the cattle would come in Mali during the times of the floods. They would go to Mauritania. But now, because of the conflict in Mali, they're coming more often. And that means there's more conflict. So the project that has been set up is really to focus on these 2 communities. They have now implemented something, it's called the Transhumance Tracking Tool. They reported nearly 1,000 incidents, 600 incidents after it happened, meaning a herder came into the farmland of somebody, and more than 300 before that, so as prevention. And what they do, they have set up 24 kind of community groups or village communities. They go visit this place, assess the damage that has been done, and they have a little fund to recompensate for that. And they also set up women's groups in this. So they have their say as well. And what they do is a lot of education as well. Education on climate change and what the consequences could be, what they can do in order to kind of make their farmland more resilient to that. So it really convinced me that in this area, it's really close to being uninhabitable. When we were there, it was more than 4 degrees centigrade. So you can imagine how difficult it is to live there. That is one example which is funded by the UN Peacebuilding Fund. And there are many actors in the second country I want to mention. We spent some time this year in Sri Lanka. And you all recall the earthquake, December 26, Christmas 2004. It was close to, actually, it happened close to Sumatra, the Indonesian island. There was the epicenter. It had a magnitude of 9.5, very strong, and affected all the countries around the Indian Ocean. In Sri Lanka alone, more than 30,000 people died. At the same time, you recall that as well, there was a civil war going on in Sri Lanka between 83 and 2009. So the two of them happened at the same time. During the Civil War, more than 100,000 people died. So it was really in bad shape, put it like this, and it was totally unprepared for this tsunami. But afterwards, what happened, and that is, I mean, it's really a positive example, a multitude of organizations, international, regional, but also the government, civil society actors, many communities got involved. They now have a national disaster management plan. They do have a Ministry of Disaster Management. They are building away from the sea, from the seashores. You can see that, and if they're building too close, they put these houses away again. They do a lot of education in schools, tell people what to do. And at the same time, what I also thought was, or impressed me a lot, is this culture of remembrance. There are so many little museums, tsunami museums. We can see the pictures of the communities, what happened there. And it impressed me a lot because it's very touching on the one hand side, but on the other hand, it does a lot for the education. And as one of the ladies in this museum, she told me, you see, we're fisher people, we are fishermen. We live by the sea, we live from the sea, but the sea also takes life away from us, and our fault is that we don't pay enough respect for Mother Earth. I really like that. It was a good kind of summary of what we do. And I thought, I'm sure there's a lot of shortcomings in that, but in general, the reaction to that was a very positive one and a good example of how kind of environmental peace building can work on different levels in an integrated way.
Thank you very much. Yes, excellent examples of learning from post-conflict and post-disaster. And really great to hear about the evidence behind some of the PBF's findings from that thematic report. So thank you for sharing that. Liz, I'll turn to you now to talk a little bit more about entry points. So in your work in the Office of the Special Representative, you obviously work across several climate-stressed and fragile environments. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the office's work in supporting building durable peace after conflict or in fragility, and what you found or what your experience tells us are some of the entry points for reconstruction efforts. Thanks.
Thanks again. And I have it's a timely question because I've just come from the breakout session on transboundary cooperation that many of us would have been in. And we had a discussion around the kind of assumptions perhaps or modalities of how cooperation across boundaries can trickle up into national processes, peace or otherwise, or political decisions. And I was thinking to myself, in our office, we're really at the national, regional, central government level, really, and in track one kind of mediation processes, and again, the prevention mandate. So I think we have a good body of evidence of how environmental peace building, if we want to call it that, can be done between communities at a local level. And I'm questioning, where does an office like ours come in? And it's a question we've been asking ourselves in there. And I'll give an example. So I think it's a new area. And since we're at the end of the day and there's so many people I can see in front of me that have more of the answer than I do, it's a call for how can we think about this. And an example of how we've been doing that is, I'll give the example of northern Ethiopia, Tigray. And we've really been reflecting over the past year as the implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement has been going along, slowly stopping, going along again, and where the entry points could be around environmental restoration, to put it, or water management. And this was really inspired, I heard earlier, an intervention from the Conflict Environment Observatory, and inspired by, if they're still here, some research they did at the time, really, showing with remote sensing that the conflict had almost total devastation of forested areas. in the Tigray region, and also on enclosures and on water, soft infrastructure. And this got to thinking that really that region had a long history, since decades, of environmental restoration. Not least because of the need to rely on natural resources for long periods of insurgency. So now we're thinking, as a bit belatedly, honestly, where the entry points would be in the DDR process, especially on reintegration, community level, with some of you in the room, what kind of entry points we didn't think of before that would be around agricultural production, environmental restoration, and so on. And I think now, trying to be more proactive about this kind of thinking and what the solutions might look like is the question of Sudan. And when we sincerely hope very soon reach the point of cessation of hostilities, will we be ready as an international community to, to have thought through, because we can't wait until then, that's when the hard work starts, have thought through what some of those entry points would be. And I think there's many in the room who know Darfur, southern Sudan. There's some real complex natural resource and land issues that multiplying the effects of the conflict as well. So that's how we're thinking about it, an invitation to think along.
Thank you. Yeah, and so I think, across both the responses so far, we've heard about several of the aspects of planning in reconstruction. So certainly the social aspects and how we're integrating the focus forward on learning and education about climate change and climate sort of impacts. But then also the environmental rebuilding, that's also a massive part of post-conflict reconstruction, and the thinking about how to harness and rehabilitate environmental and natural resources. So shifting to the sort of another aspect of reconstruction, Swathi, could you maybe talk a little bit about what it looks like to sort of invest and encourage action to climate-proof post-conflict reconstruction? What does it look like, and what are some opportunities for investments that are building resilience?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a great question, and one that I spent a lot of time thinking about, because I'm not an expert in post-conflict reconstruction, so please let me caveat my answer with that. But I think if I were going to answer that question, and I am answering that question, that we have to be able to design institutions that are inherently agile, because institutions by their very design are not agile. And when you're talking about problems like climate change and other shifting security impacts associated with it, those are evolving all the time. And so we need institutions that are are able to adapt to that. But we have to be able to incentivize that, and the question some may ask is how can you do that when you're doing post-reconstruction in a country is coming out of conflict? And I think that the better question is how can you afford not to? Because that is exactly the time in which you should embed climate resiliency, which for us is really about economic stability. In our framework that Secretary Witowski discussed earlier, we talk about preparedness and the need to do preparedness because it's far more efficient economically, as well as it saves lives and it preserves livelihoods. But again, we're not incentivized to think that way. It's much easier to respond to a disaster. It's much easier to respond to an impact after it's occurred. It's really hard as a policymaker to galvanize interest in a conflict that's about to occur, because it doesn't have quite the same cachet. And so again, we have to think about how to incentivize systems a little bit differently. We know that based on research that adaptation to decadal climate systems, investments in protective critical infrastructure, and improved climate smart agriculture, which was a comment I think we heard earlier, can yield to a 5 times higher return on food loss, which is just amazing. So if we know that, what are we doing with that? And I would argue not a lot, unfortunately. We know that there's provisional studies out there that say that for every dollar that you invest in in preventative actions within the El Nino window can return, can have a 70% return on investment by alleviating El Nino crop-driven losses, which right now is very real lived reality in sub-Saharan Africa, where they're experiencing a very terrible El Nino, a neutral phase, and now a potentially severe La Nina. And if we knew that information ahead of time, which from our science forecasters, they were able to give us that information, what did we do with it as a policymaker? And I think for me, I failed as a policymaker because I wasn't able to galvanize that window that closed very quickly in order to help position economic investments in a way that were well calibrated. And because we're not talking about humanitarian assistance, which again is after the fact, we're talking about intentional public investments with the private sector. I know that we've had a couple comments about the private sector not being engaged in this conversation. I think absolutely we need to bring them into this conversation. Adaptation to climate change is a huge business opportunity, and I don't mean that in a drumming up private sector business for climate change. I mean, I do, but what I'm trying to say is that the governments by themselves cannot do this, as we know. So we need better relationships with the private sector to help us closing that adaptation window. I think maybe I'll pause there and let my other panelists.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. I appreciate your candid response. I think, Bogolo, maybe you can speak a little bit more about this question of institutions. Obviously, Botswana is not a post-conflict reconstruction state, but there's clearly a lot of learning about strong institutions and potentially even integration of the private sector and the question of economics. Can you speak a little bit more about your experience in that?
You know, Botswana is not such a country, but at independence, many thought that Botswana was a hopeless state. And there's an article that I want to quickly quote for you to give you exactly how people thought of Botswana at the time. It says, an impoverished, arid, and hungry land without hope of achieving economic stability makes debut this week amongst the community of nations. And it goes on to say, 2 years of disastrous drought and crop failure have brought havoc and hunger to its widely scattered agricultural inhabitants. More than 1/5 of the population is literally being kept alive by emergency feeding, and numbers are rapidly increasing. This is in 1966, when we were gaining independence. So while we are not amongst any of these post-conflict states, we are certainly coming from a space of nothing. And many can argue that we are coming from a position of building. And we can certainly share an experience of what it takes to put together a nation that was deemed to be hopeless, to have nothing at the time. And we know that it really takes infrastructure, both institutional and physical infrastructure, in order to rebuild or to really build a nation together. And the institutional part is the one that is very key. And what it took to build the institutional part, I was not there, by the way, 1966, I was not there. I must preface this, because some might say, but you were not, I was not. But I have read the history books, and I'm fortunate that one of my mentors was the first woman minister and member of parliament back then, and she's still alive, 101 years old, going strong, and we thank God for that. And she shares these memories of that. At the time, Botswana had 24 pounds in its accounts, and what was very key is that there's this what we call the Khotla system, where all words, and I'm doing a direct translation, all words are equal. essentially consultation is important in building institutions. So we ensure that the institutions are built and the rentals, the investment of rentals was very important. And this was conceptualized even before we knew that we would discover diamonds. So thinking about that whatever natural resource we have, we would reinvest the rentals in order to prepare for the future generations and the future that we want to have, and prepare for the kind of economic status that we want to have is important. And then investing in the physical infrastructure that will ensure that you get to the economic state that you want. But it's very important for a 24-pound economy, you can't do much investment. So it's important that the private sector is there to facilitate that kind of resilient infrastructure, but also resilient building infrastructure. So it's not only about the resilience of the infrastructure, but it's about the infrastructure that helps the community and the nation to build resilience and economic resilience. And those are the two things that are very important as we think about the way that we use the climate finance that currently is really growing at exponential rates. So the private sector comes in. We are working on credit enhancement tools to crowd in the private sector. We are working with DFIs to do this level of investment in infrastructure, in institutions. We are ensuring that we are creating jobs. We are electrifying industries and communities for the 650 million people in Africa that currently are not that currently do not have electricity, because it's about building sustainable economies and livelihoods. And it is off the basis of that we start talking about just transitions. It is off the basis of that we start talking about adaptation and resilience. It's off the basis of that we then start to talk about then how do we reach this common and universal target of 1.5, right? And if we do not talk about development and sustainable livelihoods, it's very difficult to carry people together with a common voice of this shared climate agenda and a rebuild back agenda. But it is really based on infrastructure, both physical and legislative.
Thank you. What a great example, and I think just amazing to have the sort of foresight and the investment in the future to know that that's a state that's coming, and how can we ensure both people and infrastructure are able to sort of face those challenges in the future. But I would be remiss not to recognize that that's coming from a starting place of stability, right? And to the example that Liz brought up. When hopefully cessation of hostilities in Sudan, for example, are we prepared to bring all of this knowledge to bear on that, on supporting reconstruction efforts there? And what comes to mind for me, and a trend that we've seen across a couple of different conversations, is how do we meet the immediate needs of communities, of governance structures, of institutions, of infrastructure, while also thinking about what it looks like to make sure that those systems are supported for the future. And so I think we talked a bit about that on the first panel, is how do we sort of navigate that from a national security perspective. But I'd be interested, maybe, Almet, you can shed some light on, what it could look like to be able to do both of those efforts at the same time, to think about supporting communities in the immediate aftermath, but also building that longer-term resilience. And, is there something there that sort of means that we can do both better, or what does that look like from your perspective?
I wish I knew, and hopefully anyone here in the audience is smarter than me. Well, I've worked more than 20 years, I would say, on this issue of prevention. And investing in resilience, as you rightly say so, is not really done by governments. because there's always this shortage of funds, and then you come up with a priority list, and you always say the resilience might come later, plus the prevention even comes later than the resilience. That makes it so incredibly difficult. But what gives me hope is what you're saying, is that the economy or the private sector, they have a much bigger interest. No? Because the investment in infrastructure they do is something that costs a lot of money. So when they invest in whatever they do, whether it's natural resources, whether it's rare earth or whatever it is, there is an interest that this is of a sustainable character. So this resilience building, I would say, is something where we have a new actor in the field, at least from my understanding, and coming more from the peace building than from the climate side, I would say, do you know, there is a huge group now who work on innovative financing for peace. Because we all understand there are limited funds, and this model that you always go to a government, ask them for money, and then whatever project you want to implement is going to happen. That does not work anymore. All the international organizations definitely do know this. All NGOs do know this. So the question is, where do the new funds come from? And then, of course, the analysis is, who are our partners in this? So I really have to say that what gives me a little bit of hope that there's more and more private funding or funding from business communities, because they have their own interest in the whole issue of building more resilience and also investing more in prevention. It's, I would say, in an initial state, but there's a lot of, I would say, good ongoing analysis and approaches and alliances. So hopefully next year, or whenever we'll talk again, this is on an even better track than now.
Thank you. Great. Yeah, I think across multiple conversations today, the involvement of the private sector has certainly come up as a critical actor. When we think about post-conflict reconstruction, though, I think it's important to recognize that, you know, for private sector actors to be involved, we have to think about what is not only economically viable, but what is also environmentally sustainable. And sometimes we can find that with private sector actors, those interests can be at odds. And so I don't know, maybe Swathi or Bogolo, do you have any thoughts on what it could look like to encourage private sector actor investment into post-conflict reconstruction spaces that, you know, and what some strategies might look like to ensure they're both, you know, environmentally sustainable and potentially economically viable as well?
Well, it's a lot harder for post-reconstruction spaces, and it needs a lot more assistance in the form of guarantees, risk management, in the form of credit enhancement, because the private sector will need as little risk as possible. And so the government needs to put its best foot forward as much as possible in order for the private sector to go in. And in this space, what we need is more grant, is more extra concessional lending, and then you have on the far end private capital coming in once all this has facilitated the private sector. So we need these guarantee companies to really be operational and not only be about conversational where they are at the moment in order for the private sector to come in full force. And the philanthropists really need to step up the game. We were in New York just last week, and I cannot tell you, I shouldn't even be sharing this. I sat across somebody at lunch, and they were talking about carbon capture storage technology. And somebody signed over a $1 million check for somebody to go and experiment. Wow. You know, And I felt a little insulted, I must say, because I said there is already a community in the DR Congo that has been struggling with a carbon project to get it off the ground for verification. And because this process of verification is expensive. And this tech bro has come up, has said that he wants to try out this project, and you're signing him a $1 million check, you know. So I think philanthropy and family offices also need to get their priorities right, and to put their money where their mouth is, and to really meet humanity where it is. In order for us to deal with the current triple crisis, in order for us to really solve the reconstruction that we currently have at hand. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. It definitely sounds like there is the space and necessary requirement for additional funding and funding mechanisms, but certainly not without its checks and balances, almost as if we need sort of a set of principles to agree on in these spaces.
The liquidity is there. It just needs to be driven to the right channels.
Right, and with the right checks and balances. And with that, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I'm so grateful for this really exciting conversation. And yeah, thank you to our panelists, and we will hand it back over to Anna for the last session. Thank you.